So this session is about the aggregate data for the toolkit. And the first session was an introduction to data analysis. And then we had a session on interpreting reports. And then this final session is looking at the aggregate data. So what we're going to talk about is an introduction to what the aggregate data is, what are the things that we can do with that aggregate data. And then we're going to look at a couple of examples, which are the dimensions interpretation tool and the insights dashboard. I think I'll spend a bit more time looking at the dimensions interpretation tool because I think it's going to be more relevant for users of the toolkit. And then we'll have plenty of time at the end for questions. So it's probably going to be about 20 minutes of me talking, and then we'll have 20 minutes of questions at the end. So firstly, what is aggregate data? And it's quite simple, really. We just take all of the data that's been submitted by organizations using the toolkit, and we put it together in one big pot. And when we do that, we can find interesting things in that data that we couldn't see from individual evaluations. And there's something like 700 evaluations in there now, and around 100,000 surveys that are grouped together in the aggregate data set. So that's what we're talking about. And I just want to highlight that the anonymity of the users of the toolkit is really important. So if I'm a data analyst and I'm looking at the aggregate data set, I'm not looking at the organizations whose data it is, and all of that information is stripped out. What's really important is the patterns that we're looking for in things like what art form is the data from, or what region is the data from, or when was this data collected. So those are the things that we're looking at. It's not about comparing one organization to another. And if there are valuable things to be found in the aggregate data set, we want to make sure that that's available to you. So you're the users who are using the toolkit, you're collecting the data. So it's really important that we then provide any value that we can find in the aggregate data set back to you so you can make use of that. And that's what this session is about and what we're trying to do. So what are the things that we can use it for? There's basically two main categories. So the first one is providing context to help you as users understand the results that you're getting from your evaluation. So that's kind of like benchmarking, essentially. And then the second one is finding trends in audience experience in general. So for that first one, if you imagine that you have high expectations for a particular dimension, for a particular piece of work, say captivation, and you get a public result for that dimension of 0.82. So I guess the question is that high? Have you met your expectations there? I guess on a scale between 0 and 1, it is quite high, so maybe you'd be happy with that. But if you compare against the results, all the results together in the aggregate data set, and you find out that the highest that anyone's ever got is 0.82, well, that confirms that actually it's a really high result. And given you had high expectations, you can be happy with that. But the flip side of that is maybe you look at the aggregate data set and you see the average is 0.87. So that result that you got was below average. And given you had high expectations, you might be kind of puzzled as to why that was. And obviously the difference in your results, there's no change there. It's just when you're looking at what other organizations have achieved, it changes the way that you might interpret those results. So that's kind of the first part. And then the second part I said is understanding audience experience in general. So if we imagine, art form is a category, music is a category of one of the art forms. And you might have a number of MPOs that sit under that art form. Each MPO is doing a whole range of different work. Each of those evaluations and the events that are being evaluated, they're unique in their own way. But if we group them together, there might be things that we can learn about music as an art form that we didn't know before. Or perhaps we can compare one art form to another, like theatre and music, and we can learn how both of those two things are unique, or what makes them unique. Or perhaps there's more interesting questions if we get into more granular detail, like questions like what types of work do younger people find to be more relevant, given that we have a relevance dimension? Or how do audiences react differently to works in rural areas versus urban areas? Because we've got postcodes for people that are attending the works, and we've got postcodes for where the work took place. So we can ask these sorts of questions and find things out from the aggregate data set that we didn't know before. So to do that, at the moment, the main tools that we've got available are these two dashboards. And we use those for self-directed exploration, which means we're not telling you the answers as such. We're trying to provide you tools with access to the data set, and then you can explore those yourself. And the two dashboards we've got are the dimensions interpretation tool and the insights dashboard. And those two dashboards map to the two uses that I talked about. So the dimensions interpretation tool is about providing context to help understand your results. And the insights dashboard is about looking at trends in audience experience. And the insights dashboard is fairly new. That came out last month. Whereas the dimensions interpretation tool, that's been out for a little while now. So what I'll do is I will share the dimensions interpretation tool, and I'll talk through what we can do with that. Okay. So this is the dimensions interpretation tool. You can access this on the data science part of the Toolkit website, the same place where these sessions are going to be hosted to watch later. And this is kind of the screen that we brought up when you access the tool. And this dashboard has been built with users of the Toolkit in mind. So this isn't designed for Arts Council to use or for us as County What Counts to use. This is designed for users of the Toolkit. It's built on top of the aggregate data set. And the idea behind it is that you can compare your results to other organizations' results in a way where it's completely anonymous. So, you can't see the organizations that you're comparing against, and they can't know that you're doing this comparison. And it's just, like we said before, to give you some extra context to understand whether, a 0.82, what does that mean? Is that high score? Is that a low score? Should I be happy with that? Depending on what your expectations are. It's not mandatory to use this. You don't have to. But if you're trying to get the most out of the toolkit, we would recommend it because it can give you some more insight and it can help you understand the results you're getting. And given that you're carrying out the evaluations anyway, you might get more value out of it if you're working with this tool. So if we click to get started, I will explain what we're looking at here, and then I will go through an example of how we might use it. So the first thing you'll see, we've got these 6 charts on the screen. There's one chart for each of the dimensions that we use in the public surveys. There's a little toggle here where we can toggle between peer and public. So if we toggle it to peer, we get to see the 9 dimensions which are in the peer surveys. I'll just look at the public for now. If you've looked at this before, actually, I might mention just that we recently updated this. So it looks a little bit different as to how it did a month ago, but the functionality is more or less the same. So each of these charts is a histogram. And if you imagine that each evaluation that's submitted, they'll have a result for their captivation dimension. And if the results will be between 0 and 1. And if each result lands on this little chart where the value of that result is, the bar gets taller if more results are in that area, and the bar is lower if there's fewer results. So what you see is a distribution of how the different results come out for captivation, for example, or for challenges, if we look over here. And the green bar shows where an inputted result sits within the histogram. So there's this input results button at the top. They all start at 0.8, and you can enter a result, and then it will update accordingly. And I'll do that in a minute. The other main aspect is the percentile. So I think for most people, at least people that have had kids, the way they know of the percentile is because we use it for the weights of newborn babies. So if the baby is in the 99th percentile, it means the baby is heavier than 99% of other babies. And if it's in the 1st percentile, it means it's lighter than 99% of other babies. And the reason we use a percentile is because a baby grows so fast, 1 week to another, the weight that they are at will change, and 100 grams might be a big amount or a small amount depending on what week the baby is at. And it's the same here. So the reason we use the percentiles is because comparing captivation to challenge doesn't work exactly, because the results that you get are typically quite different. But if you compare the percentiles, you can compare those across the different dimensions, and you can get a better understanding of what classes as a higher result or a lower result. And then finally, we've got this filter panel here. What you can do with this is currently we're looking at all evaluation results. So there's 685 evaluations in here. We can use this to filter. So we can just look at museums, for example, and it will update accordingly. Or we can look at music or any other art form we've got there. And we've also got funding band or region that we can filter by. You'll also see on the right-hand side, we've got these grayed out filters. So within the toolkit, you can tag your evaluation with broad art forms and specific art forms and keywords as well, which can get really detailed. Currently, we don't have enough of these that have been used, but if more people start tagging their evaluations with these tags, then we'll have more kind of complex filters that we can use to slice the data and get more specific comparisons, so you can get kind of a better idea of whether your results are what you'd expect to get. Okay, so now I said I'd do an example. If I just go back to these slides here. So let's say you got these results from an evaluation for your public survey, and they varied for 0.79 for captivation to 0.86 for relevance. And you might look at this and think, well, they're all pretty similar, really. There isn't a big difference across the dimensions I've got. You know, maybe you'd say that your challenge result was higher than concept, but it's only a tiny difference. So, you know, it'd be kind of difficult if you're just looking at the results like this to say whether you've done particularly well in any one dimension or not. But if we use the dimensions interpretation tool to understand those a bit better, I can input those results in here. So the most frustrating thing right now is that you have to write these results in manually. And it's now updated with those results in the dashboard. And if we look, so 0.79 was what we got for captivation up here. So 0.79 is in the 24th percentile. So it's in the bottom quarter for all evaluations. And the 0.82 that we got for challenge, you know, it's only 0.03 different, but actually the challenge result is in the top quarter almost. So there's a huge difference between the 0.79 for captivation and the 0.82 for challenge. And you wouldn't be able to see that if you were just looking at the results on their own. And if we compare the challenge with the rigor, it's the exact same result. So it's 0.82 for both challenge and for rigor. But in fact, the average for rigor is 0.84. So this 0.82 is below average and it's in the 34th percentile. Whereas the challenge result, 0.82, it's above average and it's in the 74th percentile. So suddenly those results that look like there was only a tiny difference between them, they actually range from the 24th percentile to the 82nd percentile. And this is looking at all evaluations. So perhaps we want to look at a specific art form. Say these results are for museums. As you can see, they've updated. The captivation result is still the lowest result, but it's higher than it was. The distinctiveness result is in the 91st percentile. So this is a really high result. We can also see that from the histogram here. So the green bar where we lie is to the right of most of these other evaluations that have taken place. So these have updated based upon the art form that we're looking at. But say that wasn't for music, say that was for museums. Sorry, for music instead of museums. They've updated again. And now that captivation result is in a much lower percentile. So those results that you got, depending just upon whether you're comparing to different music organizations or different museums organizations, you get a very different interpretation of whether those results were high or low. And depending on what your expectations were, which you as the user, you bring those expectations with you when you're trying to use this tool, you can decide whether or not the results you're looking at are meeting those expectations or not. So this is the dimensions interpretation tool. And now I'll give you a very quick run through of the Insights dashboard as well. So this is, like I mentioned, the dimensions interpretation tool is more for users of the toolkit. This would also be useful for users, but it might also be useful for anyone who's new to the toolkit and wants to just understand a bit more about what it's for and how you can use it. We have a link to guidance, which explains how it's used and what it's for. And then we have these 4 different panels. And these panels explain what's in the dashboard and what you can do with them. So for example, the data coverage is about how much data is there and where does it come from. And if we click on that, we can see the amount of data that we've got here. So there's 48,000 public surveys. There's 1,000 peer surveys. And we can filter these as well. So if we want to just look at how much data is there from dance organizations, we can select dance here and it'll update and show us how much data there is. Dimension profiles. So this is about what do the average results look like for different dimensions. So say, for example, we can just show the public results, or maybe you want to look at public results in the Northeast, and it will update for just organizations in the Northeast. Or maybe you want to compare public and peer in the Northeast, and you can see the average results of each of the dimensions here. The results comparison. So that's how do the average dimension results compare across different types of produced work. So in this one, we can compare by art form for public results. And in this case, we're looking at captivation. So here we can look at the average results for all data, all evaluations from music, dance, combined arts, theatre, etc. And we can see how they differ. So it looks like music on average gets high captivation results, and museums on average gets lower captivation results. And that's important to know if you're trying to interpret and understand the results that you're getting as an organization. And then finally, which types of work commonly tend to achieve certain dimension results? This is just another way of looking at the data. In this case, you can filter the results. So in this case, we're looking at evaluations with a public result for challenge between 0.81 and 1. And we can see that of the different art forms, literature more often gets a high result for challenge. So there's 50% of all literature evaluations got a higher result for challenge. And 50% of organizations in the Northwest also got a higher result for challenge. So again, it's just another way of slicing the data and trying to understand what patterns we might be able to find here. So that more or less concludes the presentation. I think the main takeaway, the thing that we would suggest that you try and do would be to pick some of your evaluations that you've had, ideally some that you've submitted reports for, and then input those results into the dimensions interpretation tool and see what they tell you, see if that changes the way that you feel about those results. And if you've written an insights report, see if it changes of the things you might have written. So now I'll stop sharing my screen and invite any questions that we might have. I see a raised hand from Mac.
Hey, so I work with Artswork, and we're a bridge organisation. And I did have a brief kind of conversation with Sean about this. But when you've got the filter by NPO funding band, from what I can see from the last slide, it looks like you've got bands 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah.
So is there much of a data set around kind of SSOs or anything beyond, because we don't often do direct delivery, so we're trying to see the relevance of this.
Right, there isn't at the moment. Sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you there. I'm not finished. I was just going to say there isn't at the moment. It's not because we're intentionally excluding that data. It's just because if you've only got a very small number of evaluations to compare against, then the findings that you're getting from it are not particularly useful. So I didn't include the category in there. But if we do get more, I mean, we do have a little bit, and over time it will grow, I'd imagine. So at some point we can include those in there, but at the moment it's not a large data set.
Yeah. Okay. So then you wouldn't be able to do averages quite as easy if you've got, you know, fewer results. It maybe skew the data.
Yeah, exactly. I've tried to, so with the dashboard, the dimensions interpretation tool, and this is explained in the guidance, but basically for the public results, we're only including evaluations that have got at least 25 responses, because then that way you could be more confident that the average is reflective of the audience that was there. And we also try and show if there's a small number of evaluations to compare against, then we won't give a percentile there, basically, because you might end up being, in the 0th percentile or the 100th percentile just because there's only one other evaluation, and then it's not particularly useful.
Okay, that's interesting. Thank you.
Okay. And of course, there's also the importance of anonymity as well. That's another reason why they're not necessarily sort of complete, if you like. They don't include every piece of data because anonymity is so important. And if say there were only 3 SSOs using it, it would become easier and easier to work out exactly which organization it was that got 0.2. So that's the idea. So it's the combination of obviously the integrity and usefulness of the data, but also protecting the anonymity of the different organizations. Were there any other questions from anybody? But of course, you might just be keen to get out your results and start plugging them in and having a look at it that way.
I hope that is the case. And if you do have questions afterwards, feel free to email. And I mean, we'd all be happy to give you some more information if you need some.
Oh, Alice is checking it out already. I love that, Alice. Super keen. Fabulous. Okay, great. Well, in that case, shall we wrap up then, Mark?
Yeah, I think we should wrap up then.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you everybody for giving us your time today. As always, you know where we are. You can either email me directly because you've got my email address from this morning. If you lose it, we have our general support email address, support@countingwhatcounts.co.uk, or of course, just via the website. Essentially, you can get in touch with us in so many ways. So, we're very accessible. So, yeah, we look forward to speaking with you. Okay, take care, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.